Hey everybody, it's Carm here, coming to you on a lovely early Thursday afternoon. Wanted to come on and share something I've been revisiting. Among many things I've been listening to, just all kinds of things, revisiting certain artists, albums in general, and getting into some new things. Of course, that wonderful set that Shannon had sent, the Sun Bear concerts from Keith Jarrett, about halfway through. Listening like every other night, to another disc, and yeah, so much to absorb there. But yeah, just incredible stuff. And for this, I wanted to focus on an album that I've been kind of going back to, kind of back and forth, to reminded of this. This is actually the very first video my introduction to Jeff's videos, Calico Silver. He did a review on this album. EOS, a collaboration between Terje Rypdal and David Darling, 1983. And I'd say if I had to do a top three of Terje Rypdal's albums, this would be right in there, along with Odyssey and After the Rain kind of alternating. It's right there with it. And so, yeah, enjoying this very much. It's something I've had for many years, since the mid-90s. And I was also reminded that I'd done a thread maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which this album was the subject of, and I've been meaning to get more in depth into the album. And I guess in a way I'm kind of a twofer type thing, talking about this album, but also sort of bringing back that thread, since a lot of people are doing thread topics now. And the topic of it was, for this album, was show and talk about an album or a few albums in which the opening song sounds nothing like the rest of the album. Whether it's the style of it, the mood, the tempo, instrumentation, it just gives you very little, if any, indication of what's to follow for the rest of the album. And it's very much the case with this one here. So yeah, it's Terje Rypdal on electronic guitar and Casio MT30. A very small keyboard, which he gets a very nice warm string sound out of it, which you normally wouldn't associate with a little Casio keyboard. And David Darling on acoustic cello and 8-string electric cello. Terje Rypdal composes a majority of the music, except for one piece, Light Years by David. And yeah, this has been a long-time favorite since going way back. But yeah, the first piece, Laser, which is solo Terje on electric guitar, yeah, really doesn't give much indication at all of what you're going to hear afterwards. It's really this kind of scorching, it has kind of a, I don't know, maybe almost borders on the kind of cliche of the rock guitar hero, which you imagine them perched on kind of a high place on stage, like, and just really going for it. Lots of rapid runs up and down the neck, very fast, loud, kind of clangorous at times. Making full use of various effects, just very rock. You could even hear earlier styles coming through of rock and roll, just little bits and pieces. He's such a good player, and you think of someone had said it, or different musicians say that every influence you have, whatever it is, at some point or another comes through your instrument, whether you intend to or not. I think you could hear that a little bit on this piece of his, but it's very, it's not a subtle piece, whereas the rest of the album has a very consistent mood, much quieter, more subtle. So yeah, you get very little indication of what's to come afterwards. And then you have the title cut, EOS, the longest one, 14 and a half minutes. Totally different characteristic. The landscape is entirely different. A very kind of hazy, billowy, misty, just very long, drawn-out tones, starting in with David on cello, playing these just beautiful long tones, overlaying, lots of reverb, much more like a chamber approach you might get like with a string quartet, or just playing very, very slow, very quiet, and the piece unfolds very, very gradually. you know, especially after that first piece, you want something to just come right at you and kind of throw you into the fire, so to speak. This piece takes a lot more patience after after that the storm of laser, and it's quite a while even before Thierry comes into the piece. It's mostly cello, and then his guitar comes in. Something of a more more of his rock style, more some distortion and the wah-wah and everything. But again, the contrast between the two is fascinating, where he has this kind of metallic sound on the guitar, and David is just the warm sound of wood, and but just the space that's created between the two of them is very powerful, and it's part of that, the contrast between them, and even the tension at times is really what makes that piece in particular really special. And there's a real dramatic kind of interplay where it's almost like this kind of crying sound from both instruments going back and forth, like kind of anguish, like they're working through something, but then it just kind of slowly gets resolved, and it's very powerful. And then you have Bedtime Story, which really sounds like the title, as this kind of this feeling of being embraced, kind of like a lullaby, but not with the same tunefulness that you would associate with the lullaby. The kind of maybe not as much of a sing-song quality, but again, it does have that kind of, you feel kind of safe and protected by that piece. And again, the interplay between the two of them, hearing the contrasting approaches to their instruments, there's enough balance there where you have a little bit of that tension, but it's also, again, very comforting. Now, Light Years is sounds to be pretty much solo David on cello. It sounds like there might be a little bit of Thierry synthesizer on there, possibly, but it's a lot of it's sort of processed cello. Again, coming in with these long tones, and also he plays a lot of. It sounds like the most improvisational piece on the album, possibly. Kind of harking back to his early solo album, Journal October, where there was some shorter solo pieces where he's playing pretty much unaccompanied, very fast runs, quite intense. Though on here it's much more atmospheric with, it sounds like a lot of effects are added to it. But yeah, it's one of the, probably the closest thing to the first piece as far as intensity, but again has that kind of mutedness to it. And yeah, it's a good example of him. If you haven't heard his solo playing before, that's a good indication of, again, that kind of mixture of that intensity as well as something more contemplative. And then Melody, which is the shortest piece on the album, just over 2 minutes, is a very kind of now that almost has kind of to me has maybe like a lullaby quality as far as that, the tunefulness, the melody of it. Just a very short piece of interplay there. It kind of almost reminds me of, I don't know why it makes me think of choral music for some reason. I mean, not that there's voices on there, but something about the way, I think it's called hocketing, where you have like the voices kind of going like almost like a call and response. There's something of that on there. At least it's kind of, maybe notionally it's not, it's not real overt, but I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who hears that. And then you have, comes to what's probably my favorite piece, just about my favorite piece on the album, Mirage, just over 9 minutes. Now this one starts in with mostly, pretty much all David, strumming the cello, and then coming in with these really nice, kind of slow, stately bass lines, just long, drawn-out, repeated figures. It's a reminder of how he's one of my favorite musicians in general, my favorite cellist, and how the cello is really pretty much my favorite stringed instrument to listen to. Yeah, very long, drawn-out sort of bass lines. You could really hear inside the instrument, in a sense, which of course ECM always had emphasized, wanting to hear the instrument, as close to being in that room as possible. Although again, you have the reverb and a little bit of extra effects, but not overdone with that. And then he starts coming in bowing, and then you have that kind of the chamber feel again, accompanying himself, basically a duet with himself. And then eventually Thierry comes in with the guitar, with again that kind of somewhat metallic contrast, but just works wonderfully. And it really is like the title, Mirage. I feel like the whole album is like that. It is like a picture of mirage in a sense, you know. Not in, maybe even more so in the sense that when you get closer to that image you think you're seeing, it's not that it necessarily disappears, but it kind of morphs into something else that wasn't quite as obvious and gives you another something else to look at until you get further on in your journey, and then you see something else again coming up ahead. Yeah, the whole album has that feel. And then Adagietto concludes the album. Another piece, kind of like the title would imply, a little more in the more of the classical realm. Kind of maybe almost doesn't sound like it's Baroque, but you could hear maybe a little bit of a notion of that. But again, the interplay between the two of them on such different instruments, and there are times really where you're not quite sure who's playing what, when I don't know what you'd call it, like a bitonality, where they somehow strike just the right moment where it's like, who did that? Which I really like those moments, especially when it happens on two instruments that are seemingly quite different in approach and tone. But just such a powerful album, and sets an incredible mood. And I think of it as being more autumnal, but it could also be for this time of year, summer, like a hot, humid summer day, where you're just kind of drifting along, and just it has that tone as well. But yeah, it's just an album I've come back to over the years, and as of late been returning to it a little bit more than usual. So yeah, thanks to Jeff for that inspiration. And again, that was my introduction to him in his videos, so it's fitting that it would be one of my personal favorites here. But, yeah, EOS by David Darling and Terry Ripdahl. And they did some collaborating in later years, but although I don't think they ever did an actual duet album again. It's an album called The Sea, which is a quartet. Kettle Bjornstad and Jan Christensen, which is very good. But, yeah, I would just highly recommend if you want a different kind of duo, and again, an example of that first that opening cut, which of course introduces one to not only the album but possibly the artists themselves if you're not already familiar. And yeah, so yeah, I'd like to see if any of you have examples of that, of albums in your collection where that introductory piece sounds nothing like what's to come afterwards. And yeah, need to see some examples. So I just wanted to come on and share this. It's my my morning listen. It's a good way to start off the day, and yeah, it's just very enjoyable. So yeah, I'll try to come back on soon. I have a few newer albums. Some people were showing what their favorite albums of this year have been as far as new music being released, and just things they've been just getting in general. And I only have a few, as far as new artists, new albums from old favorites. But come on with that at some point soon, and we'll see what comes next. So hope it's beautiful out wherever you're at, and everything's well, and to the next one. Peace, love, and joy.